The station's corridors hummed with energy as students from dozens of worlds moved between classes. And Katie Morrison walked among them with her bag slung over one shoulder, trying not to stare too obviously at the incredible variety of life around her. She had seen aliens before on Mars Colony, but never this many different species in one place. And certainly never in such close quarters. Galactic Naval Academy occupied the entire upper section of Zenith Prime, a massive space station that served as the Coalition's primary military training facility. And humans had only been allowed to attend for 5 years since Earth joined the Alliance. Most species still viewed humanity as the newcomers, the primitives from a backwater world who barely qualified for membership. Katie found room 7B and hesitated at the door, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The advanced tactical combat classroom was larger than she expected, with a sunken sparring arena in the center and tiered seating rising around it like an amphitheater. And she could feel eyes turning toward her as she entered. "Another human," someone muttered. And Katie's enhanced hearing picked up the disappointment in the voice, even though it came from across the room. She kept her expression neutral and scanned for an empty seat, spotting one near the back. As she climbed the steps, she passed students who looked like they belonged in different fantasy stories, including a massive Thorian whose rocky hide gleamed under the lights, several crystalline Lexans who refracted rainbow colors, and 3 Arans whose gaseous forms floated in containment suits. "Great. Just what we needed," a voice said loudly enough for everyone to hear. And Katie turned to see another human standing near the arena floor with his arms crossed, looking at her with obvious disgust. The speaker was tall and heavily muscled by human standards, with short brown hair and a permanent scowl. His name tag read Derek Walsh, and from the way the other students glanced at him, Katie could tell he had been working hard to establish himself here. "Something wrong?" Katie asked quietly. Meeting his eyes without challenge or fear, Derek laughed. But there was no humor in it, only frustration. "We finally start getting some respect around here. And they send us someone who looks like she wandered out of a library. Not a combat school." Katie had heard worse growing up on Mars, where the lower gravity meant constant jokes about weakness from Earthborn soldiers. She simply found her seat and sat down, setting her bag beside her and pulling out her datapad to review the class materials. "I'm talking to you," Derek called out, taking a step toward her section of the seating. "I heard you," Katie replied without looking up from her pad. Scrolling through Commander Vesis's syllabus A, few alien students made sounds that might have been laughter, and Derek's face flushed red. He opened his mouth to say something else when the door at the front of the room slid open with a hiss. Commander Vexus entered with the fluid grace of his species, his reptilian features unreadable and his golden eyes scanning the class with predatory focus. The Sauron commander had trained warriors for 3 decades, and his reputation for brutal honesty preceded him. "Seats," he commanded, his voice a low hiss that somehow carried perfect authority. And the entire class settled immediately. Katie watched as Vexus moved to the center of the arena floor, his tail providing perfect balance as he turned in a slow circle to observe all the students. "Today we begin evaluation of your current skill levels," he announced. "I need to understand what you know and what you only think you know." Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, including Derek, who had moved to sit with 2 other humans Katie didn't recognize. "Sparring matches," Vexus continued, touching a control panel that made holographic brackets appear in the air above the arena. Random pairings selected by combat AI to ensure fairness. Full contact with safety fields active to prevent permanent injury. Matches end at first incapacitation or submission. The holographic display flickered as names began filling the brackets. Species designations listed beside each name. Katie saw her own name appear, and watched as the AI calculated optimal matchups based on size, mass, reach, and combat experience ratings from their files. Derek's name appeared in the bracket, and Katie noticed him sitting forward with interest, probably hoping to be matched against one of the larger alien students so he could prove himself. The AI finished its calculations and the final pairings locked into place. Katie Morrison versus Derek Walsh. The room went quiet for a moment, then erupted in whispered conversations as students realized they would get to watch two humans fight each other. Katie kept her expression calm while she processed the situation, running through scenarios and options in her mind. The way her instructors on Mars had trained her to do. Derek stood up with a grin spreading across his face, clearly seeing this as an opportunity. "Perfect," he said loudly. "I can show you how a real human fighter operates. Maybe teach you a few things before you embarrass our whole species." Katie stood as well, leaving her bag on the seat and walking down the steps to the arena floor without responding. She knew Derek was performing for the alien students, trying to demonstrate human strength and aggression because he thought that was what earned respect among warrior culture. As Vexus watched them both descend to the sparring circle, his golden eyes moving between them with interest. "This will be interesting," he said, which might have been the closest thing to enthusiasm Katie had heard from him. Human versus human, same gravity adaptation, same baseline physiology, pure skill differential. Derek rolled his shoulders and stretched his neck, making a show of warming up while Katie simply stood at her starting position with her hands relaxed at her sides. She had learned long ago that real fights happen too fast for elaborate warm-ups, and wasting energy on intimidation displays was pointless. Combat protocols active, Vexus announced as the safety field shimmered to life around the arena, creating an invisible barrier that would absorb lethal force while allowing full contact. Standard rules apply. No permanent damage. No strikes to disable reproductive capability. Match ends at incapacitation or tap out. Derek settled into a fighting stance that Katie recognized as story in combat form. All hard angles and aggressive positioning designed for overwhelming force. He had clearly spent time training with Crag or one of the other Thorian students. Learning their techniques, Katie remained still, her breathing calm and even, her eyes tracking Derek's center of mass rather than his hands or feet. Movement telegraphed from the core, and she needed to see the intention before the action. "Begin." Vexus said. Derek charged immediately, exactly as Katie expected. His opening combination was textbook Thorian. A high feint followed by a low sweep, meant to destabilize the opponent. Then a rising strike to exploit the recovery position. Katie moved her body, flowed around Derek's attack like water around a stone. Minimal motion, but perfectly timed. She didn't block his strikes, she simply wasn't where they landed. And before Derek could adjust his momentum, she had his wrist in one hand and his elbow in the other, human joints only bent in specific directions. And Katie knew every weakness in her own species' anatomy. She applied pressure at precise angles, using Derek's own strength against him, redirecting his force into a lock that hyperextended his shoulder just to the edge of damage. Derek tried to counter, but his body was already committed to the wrong position. His weight distributed exactly where Katie needed it. She swept his supporting leg with her foot while maintaining the arm lock, controlling his descent so he wouldn't injure himself on the impact. 3 seconds after the match began, Derek was face down on the arena floor with Katie kneeling beside him, one hand controlling his locked arm and the other ready to apply a finishing technique. If needed, the safety field detected his incapacitation and chimed softly, deactivating with a shimmer of light. The classroom was absolutely silent. Katie released Derek immediately and stood, offering him her hand without any expression of victory or gloating. Derek stared up at her with shock and humiliation warring across his face, his breathing heavy not from exertion, but from the sudden realization of how completely he had been beaten. Match to Morrison. Vexus announced. And for the first time his voice carried something that might have been approval. Adequate technique, coming from Commander Vexus. Adequate was high praise. Derek ignored Katie's offered hand and pushed himself up from the arena floor, his face burning with embarrassment as he brushed dust from his uniform. Around them, the other students watched with various expressions of surprise, amusement, or in some cases what might have been respect. "Lucky shot," Derek muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I wasn't ready." Katie lowered her hand without comment and turned toward the steps back to her seat. But Commander Vexus's voice stopped her. "Morrison, remain in the arena," the Sauron instructor commanded, gesturing with one clawed hand. "I want to see that technique again." Demonstrated slowly for the class. She turned back to face Vexus, keeping her expression neutral. "The arm lock or the full sequence?" "The full sequence," Vexus said, moving closer to the arena with interest that seemed unusual for the typically detached commander. Most species cannot move with such efficiency. Their combat forms rely on strength or reach or natural weapons. But you use none of those advantages. Katie glanced at Derek, who was still standing in the arena, looking like he wanted to disappear through the floor. "I'll need a partner for the demonstration. Walsh will suffice," Vexus decided. And Derek's expression went from embarrassed to horrified. He already knows how the technique feels. He can explain the experience to the others while you show the mechanics. Derek looked like he wanted to protest, but couldn't find the words that wouldn't make him look even worse. He settled back into a ready position. His jaw clenched tight. Katie moved through the sequence at quarter speed, narrating as she went. "Human close-quarters combat relies on understanding human weaknesses," she explained, demonstrating how she had read Derek's opening stance. "We evolved on a high-gravity world compared to most coalition species, which gave us dense bones and strong muscles. But it also gave us joints that only move in specific directions." She guided Derek through the attack pattern again, showing the class where his weight had been distributed and why that made him vulnerable. "Thorian combat assumes the opponent will either block or retreat," Katie continued, her hands positioned on Derek's arm without actually applying pressure this time. "But humans trained for combat learn to redirect instead, using minimal energy to exploit maximum weakness." The crystalline Lexan student named Lysis spoke up, her voice chiming like bells. "This is mathematical. You calculated his center of mass and predicted his recovery position before he moved." "Yes," Katie confirmed. "Human military training emphasizes reading opponents and adapting in real time. We run scenarios constantly in our heads, planning for multiple outcomes simultaneously." Crag, the massive Thorian warrior, leaned forward in his seat with his rocky features showing interest. "Your species trains to fight your own kind," he rumbled, his deep voice resonating through the arena. Katie paused before answering, choosing her words carefully. "Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years," she said quietly. "We learned to be very good at it before we ever met another species. Earth isn't a peaceful world, and it never has been." The class absorbed this information with varying reactions, some species nodding as if this confirmed their suspicions about primitive human nature, while others looked thoughtful. Derek stood frozen in the demonstration position, hearing about his own species' history in a way that suddenly made their reputation make sense. "Continue," Vexus ordered, and Katie walked through the rest of the technique, explaining how she had used Derek's momentum against him, how the arm lock exploited the natural weakness of the human shoulder joint, and how the leg sweep had been timed to his breathing pattern. When she finished, Vexus nodded once. "Effective," he said, which from him was significant praise. "This demonstrates why humans qualified for coalition membership, despite your limited technology. You don't need superior weapons when you understand combat at such a fundamental level." Katie returned to her seat while Derek remained in the arena, looking lost. Vexus pulled up a holographic display showing the match from multiple angles, replaying those 3 seconds over and over while pointing out details the class had missed in real time. Notice Morrison's eyes. Vexus highlighted, freezing the image. She watches Walsh's core, Nye's hands. Movement originates from the center of mass, and she reads his intention before his strike develops. Derek finally climbed back to his seat near his human friends Lisa Carter and Greg Palmer, both of whom gave him sympathetic looks but said nothing. Katie could hear their whispered conversation from her position several rows back. "She destroyed you," Greg whispered, trying to be supportive but clearly impressed by what he had witnessed. "I know," Derek growled back, slumping in his seat. "Maybe stop trying to prove we're all warriors," Lisa suggested gently. "Not every human needs to act like Crag to earn respect." Derek didn't respond, but Katie saw his shoulders tighten. She understood his frustration better than he probably realized. The pressure to represent humanity well in an academy full of species who had been exploring the galaxy for centuries while humans were still fighting among themselves. The rest of the class period consisted of other sparring matches, though none generated as much interest as the human versus human fight had. Crag demolished a smaller species in under 5 seconds using pure, overwhelming strength, while Lesness demonstrated how crystalline Lexans could refract light to confuse opponents about their true position. Katie watched each match carefully, analyzing techniques and filing away information about how different species approached combat. The Arans relied on their gaseous form to avoid physical attacks entirely. The insectoid Clixians used their multiple limbs to attack from unexpected angles, and the aquatic Delphians moved with fluid grace that made their strikes difficult to predict. When class ended, Vexus made an announcement that caused Derek to look even more miserable. "Combat partnerships for the semester," the commander said, pulling up a new holographic list. "You will train with your assigned partner for all practical exercises, learning their strengths and covering their weaknesses." The names appeared in pairs, and Katie wasn't surprised to see her name linked with Derek's. Vexus clearly intended this to be educational for both of them. Derek grabbed his bag and headed for the door immediately when class was dismissed, not looking at Katie or waiting for his friends. Lisa and Greg gave Katie apologetic shrugs before following after him. Katie took her time gathering her materials, letting the crowd thin out before she made her way to the exit. As she reached the door, Crag stepped into her path, and she had to look up to meet his eyes since he stood nearly 7 feet tall. "Human Morrison," he said formally, his voice like grinding stones. That was a warrior's victory. Quick and decisive. "Thank you," Katie replied, unsure where this was going. "My people value strength above all," Crag continued, his rocky features arranged in what might have been respect. "But we also value skill, and you demonstrated both. I have a question if you will permit it." Katie nodded, and Crag glanced around to make sure no one else was close enough to hear. "Can all humans fight as you do?" he asked quietly, "or are you exceptional among your kind?" It was a fair question, and Katie considered how to answer honestly. "I'm well trained," she said finally, "but I'm not exceptional. Any human who receives proper combat instruction can do what I did. We evolved on a world that required us to be adaptable or die. So we learned to be very good at adapting." Crag processed this, his expression thoughtful. "Your planet must be harsh indeed," he rumbled. "Thorium Prime is a difficult world, high gravity, and dangerous predators. But we evolved to match our environment with strength. Humans evolved with something else, intelligence and adaptability," Katie confirmed. "We weren't the strongest or fastest species on our world. So we learned to think our way through problems. That includes combat problems." The Thorian warrior made a sound that might have been approval, I look forward to training with you this semester, he said. Perhaps we can learn from each other. Thorian strength combined with human tactics could be formidable. After Crag left, Kitty stood alone in the corridor outside the classroom, thinking about Derek and his obvious anger. She hadn't wanted to humiliate him, but he had forced the confrontation, and she had responded the only way she knew how, quickly and efficiently. Her datapad chimed with a message from Commander Vexus. Morrison, report to my office before next class period. We need to discuss your background and training. Katie sighed and headed toward the lifts that would take her to the command level, wondering if her first day at the academy was going to get more complicated. Behind her, she could hear other students talking about the fight, speculating about human combat capabilities and whether Derek would demand a rematch. She suspected he would. And when he did, she would have to decide whether teaching him another lesson would help or hurt his development. Growing up on Mars Colony had taught her that sometimes people needed to lose before they could learn. But it had also taught her that everyone deserved the chance to grow. The lift doors opened and Katie stepped inside, already planning how she would approach her mandatory partnership with Derek Walsh, the human who had picked a fighting class and learned the hard way that quiet competence beats loud aggression every single time. 2 weeks passed since the fight that had become legendary among Academy students, and Katie found herself in the training facility every afternoon working with the most reluctant partner she could have imagined. Derek showed up for their mandatory sessions, but barely spoke to her, going through the required drills with minimal effort and maximum resentment. Your stance is still too aggressive, Katie said for the third time that session, watching Derek practice the defensive techniques she had been teaching him. You're telegraphing your intentions before you move. Derek adjusted his position without acknowledging her comment, his jaw tight and his movements stiff. They had been working on reading opponent patterns, but he seemed more interested in proving he didn't need her help than actually learning. Katie sighed and decided to try a different approach. Why did you join the academy? She asked, lowering her own guard and sitting on the edge of the practice mat. What? Derek looked surprised by the question, his aggressive stance faltering. Why are you here? Katie repeated, gesturing at the training facility around them. You're working twice as hard as anyone else and getting half the results, because you're so focused on looking strong that you can't actually become strong. Derek's face flushed with anger, but he didn't storm off like Katie half expected. Instead, he sat down across from her, still maintaining distance. You wouldn't understand, he muttered. Try me, Katie said. For a long moment, Derek just stared at the floor. Then words started spilling out like he had been holding them back for months. Everyone expects humans to be weak, he said, his voice rough with frustration. The other species look at us and see primitives from a backwater world who barely qualified for membership. They think we're soft because we don't have natural armor or claws or strength, like they do. Katie listened without interrupting, recognizing the pain behind his words. So I trained with Crag, Derek continued. Learned Thorian combat forms, pushed myself harder than anyone else. Tried to show them that humans can be warriors too. And then you show up and beat me in 3 seconds without even trying, making me look like exactly what they think we are. Weak and unskilled. Is that what you think happened? Katie asked quietly. Derek looked up at her with confusion and residual anger. That's what everyone saw. No, Katie said firmly. What everyone saw was a human using human techniques to defeat another human who was pretending to be Thorian. You weren't weak, Derek. You were just fighting like someone you're not. He started to argue, but Katie held up her hand. Crag is an incredible warrior, she continued. His species evolved on a high-gravity world with dangerous predators. They developed natural armor and enormous strength to survive. That's their advantage, and they use it well. But you're not Thorian. I know that, Derek snapped. Do you? Katie challenged. Because you fight like you think human means inferior. Like, we need to copy other species to be worthy. But that's not true. Humans have our own advantages, and they're just as valid as Thorian strength or Lexan energy manipulation. Derek looked skeptical, but at least he was listening now. What advantages? He asked. We're not the strongest or fastest or toughest species in the coalition. Katie stood and offered him her hand. Get up, and I'll show you. This time Derek took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. Katie moved to the center of the mat and gestured for him to attack her. I've seen this before, Derek said bitterly. Not like this, Katie promised. Attack me with everything you have, full speed and strength. Don't hold back, Derek hesitated, then settled into his Thorian stance and charged. Katie didn't use the same technique as their first fight. Instead, she demonstrated 3 different counters in rapid succession. Each one adapted to a different species attack pattern, showing Derek how human flexibility and adaptability allowed them to face any opponent. Thorian attacks rely on overwhelming force, Katie explained as she moved. So we redirect their momentum. Lexan attacks use energy projection. So we close distance faster than they can adjust. Aerion attacks come from their gaseous form. So we use environmental factors they can't avoid like airflow and temperature. She stopped and reset, letting Derek catch his breath. Humans don't have one perfect form, Katie continued. We have adaptability. We study our opponents and exploit their weaknesses. That's our advantage. We can fight anyone because we're not locked into one strategy. Derek wiped sweat from his forehead, processing what she had demonstrated. So I should have been using human techniques against you instead of Thorian ones. Yes, Katie confirmed. And more importantly, you should stop trying to prove you're as strong as Crag and start proving you're as smart as you actually are. Something shifted in Derek's expression, the defensive anger fading into something more thoughtful. How did you learn all this? He asked. Katie sat back down and Derek joined her, both of them cooling down from the intense demonstration. I grew up on Mars Colony, she said, staring at the far wall as memory surfaced. Lower gravity than Earth, but higher than most alien worlds. My father was a colony defense coordinator, and my mother was a combat instructor for the security forces. So you've been training since you were a kid, Derek said. And there was less resentment in his voice now. Yes, but that's not the important part, Katie replied, her voice quieter. 5 years ago, there was a pirate raid on the colony. A small group, but well-armed and organized. They targeted the residential sectors because they thought colonists would be easy prey. Derek waited, sensing this was important. My brother was 17, Katie continued. He was studying engineering, wanted to design better life support systems for deep space habitats. He was brilliant and kind and had never hurt anyone in his life. The pirates killed him because he tried to protect younger children in his sector. I'm sorry, Derek said. And he meant it. Katie nodded acknowledgement. The colony defense forces eventually stopped the raid. But it took hours and we lost 37 people. Afterward, my mother said something I've never forgotten. She said that being strong doesn't mean being the biggest or the loudest. It means being effective when effectiveness matters most. Is that why you joined the academy? Derek asked. Yes, Katie confirmed. I'm here to make sure what happened to my brother doesn't happen to other people's families. I'm not trying to prove humans are warriors. I'm trying to be good enough at what I do that I can actually help people. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Derek spoke again. I've been an idiot, he said simply. Katie almost smiled. You've been scared, she corrected. Scared that other species won't respect us. Scared that you're not good enough. Scared that humanity will fail in the coalition. But fear makes you rigid, and combat requires flexibility. So what do I do? Derek asked, and for the first time since they had been partnered. He sounded genuinely interested in her answer. Stop fighting like Crag, Katie said. Start fighting like Derek. Learn human techniques. Understand human advantages. Be yourself instead of a poor copy of someone else. Derek nodded slowly, then stood and offered Katie his hand this time. Can we start over? He asked. I mean the training, not the semester. Teach me what you know about human combat instead of what I think I should know. Katie took his hand and let him help her up. We can do that, she agreed. But it means you actually have to trust me and stop seeing me as competition. Deal, Derek said, and he actually smiled. Their next training session went completely differently. Derek listened when Katie explained techniques, asked questions instead of arguing, and started adapting his Thorian training to work with human physiology instead of against it. He was a quick learner when he wasn't trying to prove something. And Katie found herself impressed by how much he had actually absorbed from Craig by the end of the week. Derek had stopped avoiding her between classes and started asking her opinions on tactics and strategy. Lisa and Greg seemed relieved that their friend was finally acting like himself again instead of the aggressive warrior persona he had been. Performing, Katie was reviewing defensive scenarios in her quarters when her datapad chimed with an academy-wide announcement. Commander Vexus's face appeared on the screen, his reptilian features as unreadable as always. All combat students report to briefing room 7 at 0800 tomorrow, he announced. Live training exercise assignments will be distributed. Mixed species teams are mandatory. Prepare for extended simulation lasting 5 days. The announcement ended, and Katie sat back, thinking about what this meant. Live training exercises were the Academy's way of testing students under realistic combat conditions, using advanced simulations that were nearly indistinguishable from actual missions. Her pad chimed again, this time with a private message from Derek. Think we'll be on the same team? He had written. Katie considered the question. The Academy AI usually distributed team assignments to maximize learning potential, which meant pairing students who would challenge each other. She typed back a response. Probably. Vexus seems to enjoy forcing us to work together. Derek's reply came quickly. Good. I'd rather have you watching my back than pretending to be my enemy. Katie smiled at that, recognizing how far Derek had come in just 2 weeks. He was still rough around the edges and still had a lot to learn, but he was finally approaching training with the right mindset. The next morning, she arrived at the briefing room to find it packed with the team gathered in their assigned preparation room, a small space with tactical displays covering every wall and enough seating for the 5 very different beings who would need to work together for the next 5 days. Craig took up nearly half the available space by himself, his massive rocky form settling into a reinforced chair, while Zevin's gaseous body floated near the ceiling where the ventilation wouldn't disperse him. Expert difficulty on our first major exercise, Derek said, reading through the mission briefing on his datapad. That's either a compliment or they're trying to fail us right away. Vexus doesn't fail students without reason. Lisa's chimed, a crystalline form refracting the light from the displays into rainbow patterns. This is a test of our adaptability under pressure. He wants to see if we can function as a genuine unit or if species differences will fragment our effectiveness. Katie studied the tactical information scrolling across the main display. The scenario involved a heavily fortified pirate base built into an asteroid field, with approximately 40 hostages being held in various locations throughout the complex. Their team would need to infiltrate, locate the hostages, neutralize the pirates, and extract everyone without casualties. The difficulty comes from the layout, she observed, highlighting sections of the asteroid base schematic. Multiple entry points, but all of them are covered by sensor grids and defensive weapons. Once we breach, we'll have limited time before reinforcements arrive from the pirate ships in the area. Zevin's voice emanated from his containment suit speakers, soft and whispering like wind through trees. My people can pass through ventilation systems undetected, he offered. I could scout the interior and locate hostages before we commit to an entry point. Good start, Katie agreed. But we need a comprehensive strategy, not just individual actions. Let's assess what each of us brings to this mission. Crag straightened in his chair, causing it to creak ominously. Thorian warriors excel at direct assault, he rumbled. I can breach reinforced barriers and draw enemy fire while softer species maneuver. My armor can withstand significant damage. I can interface with electronic systems, Laces added. Lexan physiology allows me to connect directly to computer networks through energy projection. I could disable security systems or create false sensor readings to confuse the pirates. Derek looked uncertain about his own contribution. I've been training in multiple combat forms, he said slowly, but I'm not sure how that helps against fortified positions and superior numbers. Katie turned to him. You've been learning to adapt, she reminded him. That's valuable. Humans don't have one specific strength like the others. We have flexibility. We can adjust our strategy mid-mission when something goes wrong. And something always goes wrong. Morrison is correct, Crag agreed, surprising everyone by supporting Katie's assessment. In my training with her, I've observed that humans see patterns others miss. You anticipate problems before they develop. Zevin drifted lower. So we have strength, technology, infiltration, and adaptability, he summarized. How do we combine these elements into a functional plan? Katie moved to the tactical display and started marking locations. Zevin scouts first, maps hostage locations, and identifies the actual threat distribution. Pirates never put their forces where the official defensive plan says they should be. They get lazy or distracted. While I scout, what does the rest of the team do? Zevin asked. Lisa's and I analyzed the security network. Katie continued, looking for exploits and backdoors. Crag and Derek prepare breach equipment and plan our assault route based on Zevin's intelligence. Once we have complete information, we make the final strategy decision together. It was a solid plan that used everyone's strengths without putting any single species in an impossible situation. The team spent the next hour refining details, discussing contingencies, and learning each other's capabilities in greater depth. Derek pulled Katie aside during a break while the others were reviewing equipment options. You're good at this, he said quietly. The tactical planning, the way you include everyone's input while still maintaining direction. Have you led teams before? On Mars Colony, I worked with mixed human teams for defense drills, Katie explained, but never with other species. I'm making this up as I go and hoping it works. Derek laughed. Well, you're good at making it up then. He paused, then added, I'm sorry again about how I acted when you first arrived. I was so focused on proving myself that I couldn't see you were trying to help. You were protecting your pride. Katie said, That's human nature. We all do it. The important thing is you recognized it and changed. Before Derek could respond, the mission timer activated. Simulation begins in 10 minutes. Commander Vexus's voice announced through the room speakers. All teams proceed to designated starting positions. The 5 of them gathered their equipment and headed to the simulation chamber, a massive room that used holographic projection and force feedback to create entirely realistic combat environments. Other teams were entering adjacent chambers, and Katie caught glimpses of different species. Combinations preparing for their own expert-level scenarios. The chamber door sealed behind them, and the environment shifted. Suddenly, they were floating in a zero-gravity space environment, with the asteroid base visible in the distance, surrounded by smaller rocks and debris. Pirate ships patrolled the perimeter with scanning beams sweeping through the field. Scenario active. The AI announced. Mission parameters loaded. Hostage rescue with minimal casualties required for passing grade. 40 simulated hostages. Estimated 80 simulated pirates. Time limit 4 hours. Begin. Zevin immediately dispersed, his gaseous form spreading thin enough to slip through the asteroid field without triggering sensors. The rest of the team took cover behind a large rock cluster, while Lysis extended her consciousness toward the base's electronic systems. Security network is sophisticated, Lysis reported, her voice slightly distorted as she divided her attention between physical and digital spaces. Multiple redundancies and isolated subsystems. They're not using standard pirate configurations. Katie frowned. What do you mean? Pirates usually steal ships and bases from other species, Lysis explained. They use existing systems with minimal modifications. But this network shows signs of custom programming and strategic design. Someone planned this defensive array specifically for this base. Derek checked his tactical scanner. Could be the simulation I am making things harder. Possibly. Kitty agreed, but something felt wrong. Zevin's voice came through their team communication channel. I've located the hostages, he reported. They're separated into 3 groups. Largest group in the central habitat module. 2 smaller groups in side chambers. But the pirate distribution is unusual. Define unusual. Crag rumbled. They have heavy weapons positioned in locations that provide no tactical advantage, Zevin explained. Defensive emplacements facing interior corridors instead of entry points. It's like they're expecting an attack from inside the base rather than outside. Katie's tactical instincts were screaming warnings now. Send me the complete layout, she requested, and Zevin transmitted the data to her pad. What she saw confirmed her suspicions. The pirate defensive positions made no sense for preventing external assault, but they made perfect sense for containing a breakout attempt or defending against someone who already knew the base layout. This isn't random simulation data, Katie said slowly. This looks like real intelligence on an actual pirate operation. Lys's crystalline form flickered. That would be highly irregular, she chimed. Training simulations use generic scenarios, not classified mission data, unless the Academy wants to see how we handle real tactical challenges, Derek suggested. Maybe they loaded actual pirate base schematics to make the exercise more realistic. Before Katie could argue, alarms started blaring throughout the simulation. The entire environment flickered, and Commander Vexus's face appeared as a massive hologram above the asteroid field. All teams cease exercise immediately, he ordered. His reptilian features tense in a way Katie had never seen before. Return to briefing rooms and await further instructions. This is not a drill. The simulation environment dissolved around them, leaving the team standing in the empty chamber with emergency lighting active. Through the transparent walls, they could see other teams emerging from their chambers, looking equally confused. What just happened? Garrick asked. Voicing the question everyone was thinking, Katie pulled up the last data, transmission from Zevin's scout report, and studied the pirate positions again. I think we were training against a real target, she said quietly, and something just went wrong with that target. Crag's rocky features arranged themselves into what might have been concern. You believe this was not simulation? I think the Academy loaded real intelligence into our training exercise, Katie confirmed. Which means somewhere out there, those 40 hostages and 80 pirates aren't simulated. They're actual people in actual danger. The team exchanged glances, each processing the implications. If Katie was right, their training exercise had just become a real mission briefing. And whatever had caused Vexus to abort the simulation meant the situation had changed. Possibly for the worse, they hurried to the briefing room along with dozens of other students, finding Commander Vexus waiting with a holographic. The analysis room had transformed into a tactical command center, with Katie's team surrounding a central holographic display showing every detail they had gathered from the simulation. 2 hours had become 90 minutes of intense work, and Katie could feel the pressure of real lives depending on their accuracy. The western entry point shows the weakest sensor coverage, Derek reported. highlighting a section of the asteroid base, but it's a trap. The corridor beyond has concentrated fire positions that would slaughter anyone coming through. Liss's crystalline form pulsed as she integrated data. However, if we disable the power grid in sectors 4 and 7 simultaneously, the defensive weapons in that corridor lose automated targeting, she chimed. Manual operation only, which reduces their effectiveness by 63%. Cragg studied the defensive positions with a warrior's eye. Even with reduced effectiveness, the corridor remains a killing zone, he rumbled. Unless we provide a distraction that draws pirate forces away from that position. That's where Zevon's infiltration data becomes critical, Katie said. Pulling up the scout reports, the ventilation system connects to the main habitat module where most hostages are held. If senior teams can create a credible threat at the eastern entry point, pirates will respond with overwhelming force. Leaving the western corridor undermanned, Zevon's gaseous form swirled with thought. But the hostages in the side chambers, he whispered. They'll be isolated when pirates respond to the eastern threat. Vulnerable to execution if the pirates realize they're losing. It was the tactical problem Katie had been wrestling with for the past hour. Any assault strategy that focused on the main hostage group risked the smaller groups being killed as leverage or revenge. Derek had been quiet for several minutes, staring at the holographic display with intense concentration. What if we don't assault at all? He said. Suddenly everyone turned to look at him. Explain, Katie prompted. The simulation showed us that pirates positioned their defenses against internal threats. Derek continued, his voice growing more confident as he worked through the idea. They're worried about the hostages fighting back, which means the hostages include people with combat training or tactical knowledge. That's speculation, Lisa's pointed out, but it's logical speculation, Katie said. Seeing where Derek was going, pirates don't waste resources defending against threats that don't exist. Continue. Derek manipulated the holographic display, highlighting the hostage locations and the defensive positions around them. If the senior teams can get a message to the hostages, information about the defensive layout and timing for a coordinated breakout, the hostages could attack from inside while coalition forces breach from outside. Pirates would be trapped between two fronts. Cragg made a sound of approval. A pincer strategy, he rumbled. Thorian classic. Effective when executed with proper coordination. But how do we get a message to the hostages? Zevon asked. Pirate communication systems are isolated to prevent exactly this kind of coordination. Liss's form brightened. Not entirely isolated, she chimed. Life support systems connect all habitat modules, including hostage areas. I mapped the network architecture during our simulation. If someone could physically access the main environmental controls, they could encode a message in the atmospheric regulation patterns. Katie felt a spark of hope. Morse code equivalent, she said. Variations in air pressure or oxygen mix that anyone with basic training would recognize as communication. Exactly. Lisa's confirmed. The pirates monitor digital communications, but they don't watch environmental systems for encoded messages. It's a blind spot in their security. Derek was nodding enthusiastically now. So senior teams infiltrate, access environmental controls, send the message to hostages, then coordinate simultaneous internal and external assault when hostages confirm receipt. It was risky and required precise timing, but Katie could see the elegance in the strategy. It used human tactical thinking combined with alien species advantages, and most importantly, it gave the hostages agency instead of treating them as passive victims. We need to present this to Commander Vexus, Katie decided. Along with our detailed analysis of defensive positions and sensor vulnerabilities, the team compiled their findings into a comprehensive tactical brief. organizing the information so assault teams could access exactly what they needed without wading through unnecessary data. Lysis created three-dimensional maps of the base with color-coded threat levels. Derek documented alternative entry strategies for different species capabilities. Craig provided analysis of defensive weapons and recommended counter-tactics. And Zevin mapped ventilation routes for gaseous species infiltration. Katie wrote the executive summary, distilling hours of analysis into clear, actionable recommendations. When she finished, she looked at her team with genuine appreciation. "This is good work," she said quietly. "Really good. We've given them a real chance. We did it together," Derek replied. And there was no trace of his earlier need to prove individual superiority. Every species brought something essential. They transmitted their analysis to Commander Vexus and waited. 10 minutes later, the commander appeared in their preparation room with 3 senior students Katie recognized from advanced classes. "Your tactical brief is exceptional," Vexus said without preamble. "Fleet Command is reviewing the coordinated breakout strategy now, Morrison. Explain your reasoning for trusting hostages to execute their part of the assault." Katie straightened. "The pirate defensive positions indicate they fear internal resistance," she began. "That fear suggests the hostages include trained personnel, possibly civilian security forces or off-duty military. Additionally, treating hostages as capable allies rather than helpless victims changes the tactical equation from rescue to coordinated assault, which multiplies our effective force." One of the senior students, a Thorian female named Kessa, nodded approvingly. "Command agrees," she rumbled. "We're implementing your strategy with modifications for real-world variables. Morrison team will maintain communication link with assault forces, providing real-time tactical analysis as situation develops." Katie felt her heart rate increase. They weren't just planning anymore. They were directly supporting active combat operations. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of activity. Senior teams deployed toward Meridian 7, while Katie's team monitored communication channels and updated tactical assessments based on new intelligence. The hostages did include former military personnel who had been traveling to a colony world when pirates captured their transport, and they responded immediately to the encoded environmental message. Katie watched holographic displays showing the assault team's approach, their careful navigation through the asteroid field, and the tense moments when Lysis predicted sensor vulnerabilities proved accurate. Coalition forces reached the environmental control station and began transmitting detailed instructions to the hostages. "Hostages confirm receipt," the communication officer reported. "They're organizing internal assault teams, requesting 30 minutes to prepare." Derek was monitoring pirate communications. "Pirates are getting nervous," he said. "They've detected unusual activity near their perimeter, but can't pinpoint coalition positions. Should be moving forces to eastern entry point soon." "Senior teams confirm," Vexus announced. "Diversion will commence in 20 minutes. Coordinated assault in 30. Katie pulled up the timeline they had created, checking and rechecking every element. The margin for error was razor-thin. If any part of the plan failed, people would die beside her. Derek caught her eye. "We did everything we could," he said quietly. "The rest is up to them." He was right, but Katie still felt the weight of responsibility. Her brother had died because colony defenses hadn't been good enough, and she had joined the academy to prevent that from happening to others. Now she was watching her first real tactical plan being executed with real lives at stake. "Diversion initiating," the communication officer announced on the displays. Coalition forces launched a feint attack against the eastern entry point, using exactly the aggressive tactics pirates expected from alien warriors. Pirate forces responded as predicted, concentrating their defenses and pulling personnel from other areas. "Western corridor now undermanned," Lysis confirmed. 3 defenders remaining, down from 12. Hostage teams moving. Another update came through. They've secured improvised weapons and are advancing on pirate positions from interior. Katie watched the synchronized assault unfold. Coalition forces breached the western corridor exactly as the hostages launched their internal attack. Pirates found themselves surrounded and overwhelmed. Unable to respond effectively to threats from both directions simultaneously, the entire operation took 17 minutes from first breach to final pirate surrender. 0 hostage casualties, minor injuries to 3 coalition personnel, and all pirates captured alive. The analysis room erupted in cheers as confirmation came through, and Katie found herself suddenly surrounded by her teammates. Crag lifted her completely off the ground in what was apparently a Thorian celebration gesture, while Zevon swirled around them all in an excited vortex. "We did it," Derek said, laughing with relief and joy. "Your strategy actually worked." "Our strategy," Katie corrected. "I couldn't have developed it without everyone's input."